A millionaire discovers his former nanny searching for food in trash. What he did will inspire you. John stood at the edge of the gala, the extravagant ballroom aglow with crystal chandeliers and laughter polished by wealth. The dignitaries of Chicago circled him, their designer suits taut with ambition, their chatter drowning in superficial pleasantries. But the laughter began to fade when he stepped outside, seeking relief from the orchestrated euphoria. The night air was sharp, a reminder of reality. It was then he saw her, the frail figure of Mrs. Thompson, his former nanny, sifting through a dumpster like a ghost lost in time. His heart dropped, a steady ache beginning to unfurl. Hadn't she once held him with such love, her laughter echoing in their home? The sight was a jarring juxtaposition to the glitz surrounding him. At that moment, everything he had built, all the accolades he gathered like trophies, felt like ashes in his mouth. He felt paralyzed, his mind a whirlpool of conflicting thoughts. What would his colleagues say? How would this affect his standing among the elite? Would they view him as weak, a traitor to his status? The very people who reminded him night after night of the relentless grind and shimmering achievements now murmured their disapproval in the back of his mind. Could he really walk away from this lavish world to connect with someone so marginalized by society? His stomach churned, constricting as he watched her rummage through debris, desperate for scraps. Memories flooded back. Mrs. Thompson's warm embrace when he was afraid, her tireless nurturing that shaped his early years. Guilt clawed at his insides, the woman who had devoted her life to uplifting him, now crossing paths with this harsh reality. A million questions fought for his attention. Why hadn't he reached out? Why hadn't he checked in? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As he took a hesitant step closer, the faces of his affluent friends flashed in his mind. Laughter ensued at the mere thought of mingling with the less fortunate. The weight of their superficial friendships felt suffocating, the threat of their judgment more tangible than ever. Confronting this part of his life could risk everything he had: the career, the reputation, the facade of success. But what about the value of loyalty? The emotional turmoil was a harsh reminder of who he'd become. The contrast was unbearable. Could he, a self-made millionaire, really step beyond the boundaries of comfort to rescue the woman who once saved him? With each passing moment, the pull of his past tightened its grip, his decision looming larger than life. Ignoring the luxury that bled into every corner of his existence, he felt an insatiable desire to dive headfirst into the unknown, into her pain, her struggle, into a reality he had been shielded from. Yet, the risk was formidable. Engaging with her plight could embellish him as a hero in his narrative, but would it unravel the carefully woven tapestry of his social standings? Caught in this agonizing crossroad, he felt the enormity of his choices encasing him like a vice. All that glimmered felt distant, and his heart raced with purpose. Would he have the courage to confront this shattering contrast, to unearth the truth behind Mrs. Thompson's plight, even if it meant turning his world upside down? The tension escalated, leaving him teetering on the edge of a life-altering decision, one that could redefine everything he thought he understood about family and loyalty. John's breath hitched as his heart pounded, a percussion of guilt and anticipation reverberating through him. The polished marble beneath his feet felt cold, a stark reminder of how far removed he was from the warmth of companionship once shared with Mrs. Thompson. Each cautious step toward her felt monumental, as if he were crossing the threshold into an abyss that might swallow his carefully crafted existence whole. The air buzzed with a stagnant tension of indecision and urgency. What was it about wealth that washed away compassion? He had built his empire on the backs of others, yet the brilliance of his success now felt like a shackle. Deep down, he understood that the moment he had made his first million, he had also chosen to silence a part of him, the side that cared, the side that remembered those who had sacrificed so much for him. Just then, Mrs. Thompson glanced up, her worn features illuminated by the dim streetlight. Recognition sparked in her eyes, a flicker of the affection that had once bridged their worlds. For a fleeting instant, they shared a connection as if the years between them dissolved. But this reality was one he had avoided for too long, and it threatened to unravel everything. "John?" Her voice trembled, a haunting blend of hope and disbelief. In that moment, his carefully constructed facade began to crack, revealing a raw humanity he had buried beneath layers of arrogance. "Mrs. Thompson," he finally breathed, the name hanging in the air like an anchor tethering him to the past. Each syllable beckoned forth memories of bedtime stories, homemade meals, and a love so unconditional that it transcended the divide of class. Yes, she had been his caretaker, but more importantly, she had been his family. As he approached, an internal battle raged within him. Should he reach out and help her? Would it alter the social landscape he inhabited? A chilling thought whispered in his mind. Could he genuinely turn his back on the superficial bonds forged in the world of business? Or was he merely an opportunist, acting out of guilt rather than genuine compassion? "Why didn't you call me?" The question escaped his lips before he could amend it, the gravity of uncertainty pouring into the space between them. He searched her face for answers, desperate to understand the trajectory that had led her to this point. "Pride," she sighed, turning her gaze back toward the ground, littered with discarded memories. "I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to be a burden." That response pierced him. Pride, a sentiment James had witnessed, transformed strong souls into shadows of themselves. How could someone who had nurtured the young version of himself carry such a heavy weight? The fierce realization ignited something within him, a fire in the belly that screamed for action. "I can help," he insisted, his voice steadier than he felt. "You don't have to be alone in this." Her eyes widened, tension dissipating ever so slightly with hope. But new questions arose, knotting his stomach anew. What did help entail? Would charity taint their relationship before it could take root again? He certainly didn't have the experience for the complexities of her situation. His glossy world provided no manual for this reality he had evaded. But somehow, the path to redemption started with choices, and the first choice he could make was to reconnect with a woman who had deserved so much more than he had given her. As he stood there, wrestling with his dilemma, a vibration from his phone broke the moment. It was a message from a close associate, a reminder about an upcoming meeting filled with high stakes and lavish promises. Two worlds beckoned him, the gilded life of high society and the stark reality of compassion. Which path would he choose? The tension hung heavily in the air, and John stood at a precipice. One step toward the past could lead to the future, but what would it cost him? Would he embrace the uncomfortable truth of their shared history, or would he retreat back to the safety of wealth? The moment was ripe with potential, and John could feel something shifting within him. The next step was entirely his. But at what cost? The choice loomed ahead, leaving John poised on the edge of transformation, destined to confront the contrasting worlds that defined his life. John felt the weight of Mrs. Thompson's gaze settle on him, a mix of hope and lingering uncertainty that draped the moment in a heavy stillness. His phone buzzed again, a modern distraction that threatened to pull him back. He glanced down at the message. Another business deal, another step toward wealth, another trap closing in. Dread gnawed at him, a reminder of the sparkling facade he had carefully constructed over the years. "Mrs. Thompson." He hesitated, the name a lifeline. I really want to help you." but I need to understand what you need. I can't just throw money at the problem. It requires more than that, doesn't it? His voice faltered, betraying his inexperience in handling affairs that were not dictated by profit margins. Her eyes, once so vibrant with life and laughter, now held a deep, complex sadness that he had never noticed before. John, years ago you took me in as family. I'm not here merely for handouts. I've worked all my life trying to make ends meet, but sometimes things get too heavy. The unspoken words hung in the air. He could sense the urgency, the unfiltered rawness of her plight, and it began to dismantle his rigid perceptions. Each passing second felt like an eternity, and as he stood there, the glitz of his executive lifestyle clashing violently with the reality unfolding before him, something deep inside him twisted, a questioning of his self-worth and purpose. Then what if we team up? He found himself suggesting, an idea forming in the midst of confusion and determination. Maybe I can provide you assistance, but also work on something together. You know the community well. Can you help me understand what's needed? Mrs. Thompson looked taken aback, her brow furrowed, searching his face for sincerity. What do you mean by working together? I know my experience might not translate perfectly, but you've been on the ground. You've seen the struggles. Perhaps we could create something that brings support to those who, like you, have fallen on hard times. As he spoke, a strange clarity began to wash over him, as though grasping at a lifeline that would bridge his past and what he could become. What if he channeled his resources not into extravagant parties and towering skyscrapers, but into something that mattered? John, you have a world that is different from mine. You have your business, your lifestyle. It won't be easy. You could get hurt. What's being hurt compared to the potential of making a difference? The words slipped out before he could swallow them back, but it felt right. In the rawness of the moment, he wanted to ignite a change, not just in his heart, but in the lives of those around him too. I'm not saying it would be easy, he continued, but I need to make something meaningful out of my success. I've strayed too far from what really matters. My decisions have created such a distance from the kind of life you led, a life that taught me empathy and purpose. In his mind, the gears began turning. He envisioned a community project, a real initiative that could address social challenges while building connections that transcended mere financial assistance. Maybe this journey could lead him to rediscover meaningful relationships lost in his pursuit of wealth, like the one he'd shared with Mrs. Thompson. She considered his words, her expression softening, but skepticism still danced in her gaze. People are difficult, John. They have expectations, and sometimes they are disappointed when those expectations aren't met. And sometimes, he shot back, they're surprised by the miracles that happen when we give them a second chance. An unexpected hope flickered in her eyes, but she remained wary. If you're sincere, then you'll have to realize this won't be a pretty path. There are no guarantees. I'm ready for that. His resolve strengthened, a sense of purpose rising within him. I want to meet them where they are, not as a businessman, but as someone who cares. I need to be part of something beyond profit. As they shared a silent moment, John noticed the tension begin to unravel between them, the threads of their past weaving back into place, intertwined with a newfound vision for the future. As sounds of the city grew louder around them, he could feel a shift, a stirring of something powerful within. But just then, as he shifted his gaze to the street, bustling with all the intricacies of life, a glint of uncertainty flickered anew. What if he failed? What if the world he had built up turned its back on him when he sought to dismantle it? Could he reconcile the businessman with the human, and would the world allow him to? The stakes began to crystallize into a daunting reality, a test of his resolve that loomed above him like a thundercloud. John realized the real challenge was just beginning, a journey that would push him into the depths of his own vulnerabilities while challenging the very foundations he had built. His heart raced as he faced what lay ahead. No longer merely an existential question, but an uncharted expedition would pull him deeper into discovering who he truly was. The moment beckoned. He was caught in its grip. The time had come to confront more than just the decision at hand. He was about to dive headfirst into a world where his past and future would collide in ways he never anticipated. Would he emerge a transformed man, one who could reconcile both sides of his life? Or would he lose himself entirely in the storm of compassion and guilt? John stood at the brink of awakening, and what he didn't know was that each choice resounded with the power to dismantle all he had achieved, as well as the potential to reshape his very essence. The air felt different as John stepped away from Mrs. Thompson, charged with a newfound sense of purpose, yet fraught with apprehension. The city lights flickered against the twilight, the bustling sounds of the streets reverberating in a dissonance that seemed to mirror his inner turmoil. What lay ahead wasn't just a new initiative. It was a personal transformation that threatened the very foundations of the life he had carefully built. He needed a plan. The notion of building something meaningful with Mrs. Thompson gnawed at him, a constant echo in the back of his mind. This could either be a remarkable opportunity or his biggest folly. He had already begun to slowly detach himself from the trivial pursuits of power and wealth. But as doubt crept in, he wondered if he was truly capable of creating the change he envisioned. As he walked home, he mentally mapped out the steps he needed to take. He recalled moments from his childhood, the laughter shared with Mrs. Thompson, the warmth of the meals she prepared, the sense of safety she had provided. They were fleeting memories, eclipsed by years of ambition that diverted him away from what mattered most. Did he even know how to listen to the community? Could he really understand their needs? His mind raced with questions, each one steeped in uncertainty. His experience in business operations had crafted an image of a decisive leader, but this was an entirely different realm. He wanted to help a group of people whose lives were intertwined by struggle and resilience. How did one effectively bridge the gap between mere financial assistance and true, meaningful support? That night, rest eluded him. As he lay in bed, images of families struggling, individuals searching for dignity amidst despair, and the weight of expectation pressed down on him. There was no handbook for the role he wanted to play. Each tick of the clock mirrored his growing anxiety, challenging his decision to pursue this path. But then, as dawn broke, illuminating his dark thoughts, a flicker of clarity surged within him. If he could gather a team, people who were experienced and passionate, who understood the community better than he ever could, perhaps together they could carve out a purpose. He would need to let go of the reins, to lean into vulnerability, not just in his professional life, but also emotionally. He could not orchestrate this project alone. What he needed was a coalition of compassion, people united not by ambition, but by the shared goal of serving others. Determined, he reached for his phone. He needed to reconnect with old contacts, local leaders, anyone who could lend their expertise or insight into the issues plaguing the community. Each call he made felt like a step away from the facade he had once embraced. The fear of losing respect among his peers loomed, but as individuals agreed to meet with him, a growing sense of validation bloomed inside. When he finally sat down with a few key figures from non-profit organizations, the discussions overwhelmed him with their intensity. The stories shared filled his heart with both empathy and urgency. Each tale of struggle shattered his previous assumptions. He realized the depth of need echoed not just as isolated instances, but as a collective fight for dignity and survival. However, as the conversations unfolded, resistance crept back in. Some individuals expressed caution, warnings about remote initiatives that had failed, and the difficulty in gaining community trust. Could he truly forge relationships with individuals weighed down by skepticism, or was he destined to repeat the mistakes of others? What if they resent my intentions? He questioned the group, the tightness in his chest mirroring his vulnerability. They exchanged glances, and there it was again, the fear that clung to his every aspiration. "Success in these endeavors requires authenticity, John," one of them replied solemnly. "You must be willing to engage fully to become more than just a benefactor. You need them to see you, not as a wealthy stranger, but as one of their own." His heart raced as the gravity of their words settled in. The path ahead was murky. Redemption felt like a steep hill to climb. But for the first time, he sensed a flicker of confidence. Perhaps he could learn to not only lead, but also to listen. As he drove home, the sun setting in brilliant hues, John felt a surge of resolve mingle with the ever-present anxiety. It was clear. He was not merely seeking to help, but embarking on a journey toward self-discovery, blurring the lines between who he had been and who he could become. He wasn't just meeting them at the crossroads. He was about to find out what it truly meant to walk alongside them. But a sudden thought struck him. What if he was still missing something? What if his past achievements clouded his ability to connect authentically? What if he hadn't really learned how to reach out with a genuine heart? The questions loomed large, and as darkness enveloped the city, John felt the weight of his mission settle around him, a stark reminder that only time would unveil the answers he desperately sought. Each choice he made loomed with potential, yet each step forward also spiraled into uncertainty. Would that uncertainty also bring the vulnerability he needed for change? The reality loomed ahead, and the time for confronting his fears seemed to approach swiftly. John awoke the next morning enveloped in a blend of determination and apprehension. The weight of his newfound purpose pressed heavy on his shoulders, yet it also ignited a fire within him. He could not ignore the burgeoning drive to effect change, nor could he retreat into the luxury of indifference. Today, he resolved to plunge deeper into the very heart of the community he aimed to serve. As he prepared for the day, he scanned the room filled with remnants of his past life, trophies, framed photographs, accolades. Each piece reflected a version of himself rooted in achievement, status, and financial success. They stood as stark contrast to the people he now wanted to engage with, and a sense of discomfort washed over him. Could those accolades perhaps serve as an obstacle to genuine connection? He questioned whether all that glimmered before him truly had any meaning in a world overshadowed by hardship and struggle. He found himself at a local coffee shop that had become a hub for chatter and meetings among community members. The smell of roasted beans mingled with whispered conversations. But instead of familiar faces, he noticed a collection of weary individuals seated alone, immersed in their thoughts. The sight stirred something deep within him. What did they talk about when no one was listening? Did they feel the same sense of isolation that gnawed at him? While nursing his coffee, he struck up a conversation with the barista, a sharp-eyed young woman named Mia. In her animated storytelling about the struggles of her neighborhood, John felt that familiar pressure build in his chest. This was it, the living, breathing fabric of the community he wanted to understand, yet all he could offer was a smile and an attentive ear. Frustration bubbled up inside him at how little he truly knew. "Do you ever feel like no one really sees what happens here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia paused, meeting his gaze with an intensity that startled him. "Every day. But it's not about being seen. It's about being understood." Her words pierced through the cacophony of his thoughts. Did he truly understand? Every calculated financial decision had been made without regard for the human cost. He had navigated corporate boardrooms with ease, but the thought of entering these lives filled him with dread. Deciding he had to confront his fear, John slid into a chair at a nearby table, hiring courage as his guide. He introduced himself to another patron, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Sanders, who was sifting through some papers filled with community plans and dreams. Mr. Sanders initially scrutinized John with guarded interest, but gradually softened as John leaned in, genuinely curious. Their conversation bloomed, a dance of questions and reflections. Mr. Sanders shared stories of families who once thrived but had since fallen on hard times. Domestic challenges, shifts in employment, and the absence of resources painted a vivid picture that John could no longer dismiss as mere statistics. The weight of responsibility loomed larger. This wasn't just a project, it was a commitment to humanity. As the day advanced, John found himself oscillating between moments of clarity and sticking points of doubt. He understood that to make any genuine impact, he had to look beyond the surface. He needed to assimilate into their lives, break bread with the families, laugh with the children, and listen to their aspirations. What frightened him most was recognizing that vulnerability was intertwined with this journey. Every story shared, every moment of connection would require peeling back the layers of his own guardedness. How could a man cloaked in privilege expect to earn trust without first revealing his own insecurities? On his way home, an unexpected twist twisted in his gut, a flicker of unease. As he parked his car, he noticed a group scrounging through trash bins on the corner of his street. His breath caught in his throat as recognition washed over him. With a sinking heart, he peered out, slowly recognizing a figure that seemed awfully familiar. Mrs. Thompson, his childhood nanny, once a beacon of love and safety, now rummaging through refuse. The image tore at the fabric of his reality, erupting a kaleidoscope of emotions within him: shame, confusion, and a paralyzing urge to act. How could he reconcile the separation of his privilege with the ruins of a life he once cherished? The realization crashed over him with staggering force. If he truly aspired to make a difference, he had to start with honesty. The journey ahead would test not only his ability to connect, but also the depths of his conviction. He wasn't just going to face these lives, he would be faced with the painful truth of his own choices. The rush of conflict filled him as he looped around the block to confront his buried fears. Would he walk past or step forward? The moment to grapple had arrived, and he wasn't sure he was ready, but readiness had never come easily. As the shadows stretched across the pavement, John grasped the weight of his mission. A collision course with both community and conscience awaited him. Would he be fortified by this reckoning, or would it shatter the last traces of his secure past? The answer hovered uneasily in the air, drawing nearer with every breath he took. John's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he contemplated his next move. The image of Mrs. Thompson, the woman who had devoted years to caring for him, now scavenging for scraps, was a wound that throbbed in his chest. The very act of confrontation felt insurmountable, yet it was necessary. These were not just faces in a crowd to him anymore. They were reminders of a societal rift he had orbited like a planet around the sun. Taking a deep breath, John forced himself out of the car. Each step toward the corner felt like an eternity, laden with a blend of guilt and determination. As he approached, Mrs. Thompson paused mid-motion, her eyes wide with shock and then recognition. "John?" She squinted, as though she might be dreaming, but he was all too real. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, attempting to keep his voice steady as it trembled slightly. What are you doing here?" Her hands stilled, and she looked away, a flicker of hurt etched on her face. "Just looking for something to eat," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Times have changed since you were just a boy." The words struck him like a hammer. He felt the full weight of his privilege crashing down. Here she was, the woman who had once known him as an innocent child, reduced to rummaging through refuse, while he had lived a life of luxury without ever considering the implications. "What can I do?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. I can help. I can get you food, or—" Mrs. Thompson shook her head, her expression a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "You can't fix this, John. People like me need more than just a meal. We need respect, understanding, an opportunity." As her words sank in, John realized that these encounters were not merely transactional. There was an emotional truth that begged for acknowledgement. He wasn't just talking about food. He was grappling with his own ignorance, the veils of self-serving concern that had kept him blind to her struggles like so many others. A fire ignited within him. He wouldn't shy away from discomfort. Instead, he would walk the path toward understanding, albeit bruising. "Tell me about your situation, Mrs. Thompson. What happened?" The question spilled out, earnest and raw. Her gaze flickered back to him, hesitation replaced by a cautionary wisdom. "It's a long story, John. Let me ask you something in return. Are you ready to hear the truth?" The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. He recognized this was his moment, one that could either solidify his purpose or sink him back into ignorance. "I need to hear it," he replied, earning a small nod from her. Over the next hour, seated on the curb, Mrs. Thompson recounted a life marked by hardship, the loss of her husband, the precariousness of her job, the inadequate support systems that barely kept her afloat. Each revelation was a needle prick, unraveling the comfortable narrative he had clutched for so long. Her experiences were real. They were tangible. John felt himself learning, heading deeper into emotional territory where he could no longer place barriers. He began to understand that real connection required him to step outside himself, to empathize and engage with the realities of others. As they spoke, his thoughts flitted to all the plans he had envisioned, his desire to implement change. But now he recognized it was less about grand gestures and more about creating relationships that echoed with authenticity. Every story he heard added another thread to the fabric of his understanding, weaving together a stark tapestry of human experience. Eventually, as dusk set in, John stood up, heart racing. "I want to help you, not just with food, but with rebuilding your life. We can figure something out together." A flicker of hope surfaced in her eyes, but uncertainty lingered. "John, it's not that simple. People like me don't easily trust the stories of those who once walked away." "I will earn that trust," he vowed, emboldened by the intersection of fear and determination. "I won't disappear again." She studied him for a moment, vulnerability washing over her face. "I hope you mean that." As they parted, an unfamiliar sense of purpose took root in John's chest, a commitment to looking beyond himself, to uncovering ways in which he could advocate for the lives of others. Driving home, John mulled over the conversation, every word resonating powerfully within him. What more would he uncover if he delved deeper? Those faceless stories he had perceived too easily were elements of a complex narrative, rich with potential. Yet the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Each layer of society's struggle unraveling before him meant wrestling with his own complacency, fears, and the looming specters of failure. With an unshakable resolve, John pondered what lay ahead. He needed to confront not just others' realities, but his own shortcomings as well. The dawn of change was not just around the corner. It was pulsating in the heart of the community. But the real question loomed. How deep was he willing to go? Would he stifle the inevitable missteps or transform them into stepping stones for growth? The answers awaited him like shadows at the edges of every turn. John's thoughts raced as he maneuvered through the evening traffic, the familiar streets now tinged with a renewed sense of purpose. Each red light became a personal moment of reflection. He couldn't ignore the echoes of Mrs. Thompson's words rattling in his mind. Respect, understanding, and opportunity. They gnawed at him relentlessly, challenging the boundaries of his comfortable existence. Upon arriving home, John paused at the threshold of his luxurious abode. He had spent years cultivating this life of ease, and yet it felt more like a gilded cage that separated him from the world he now longed to engage with. He hesitated, contemplating the value of what lay within and what lay beyond. With a firm resolve, he stepped inside, but instead of retreating into the cocoon of his wealth, he found himself drawn to the study, a room of intellect he seldom used. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the window, illuminating the steep stack of books he had amassed but never fully explored. As he mulled over his decisions, he felt a strange compulsion to explore the depths of those unread volumes. Opening the first book, he was greeted with thoughts on social justice, economics, and change. Each word resonated with his internal struggle, compelling him to take notes. He scribbled furiously, ideas cascading into a flurry of plans and possibilities. He realized knowledge was a tool he had neglected, one he could wield to advocate for change, not just for Mrs. Thompson, but for countless others grappling with hardships he had once ignored. Days turned into weeks as John transformed his home study into a makeshift war room for change. He immersed himself in research, discovering nonprofit organizations, legal frameworks, and community resources that aim to uplift marginalized individuals. He began reaching out, arranging meetings with local leaders and activists who were deeply entrenched in the very issues that had once seemed so distant to him. Connecting with these individuals fueled his desire to learn more, but it also revealed a significant obstacle: the stigma that enveloped those in need. Shrouded in misunderstanding, they were often viewed through a lens of judgment rather than compassion. John became increasingly aware of his own biases, questioning whether he was ready to confront these difficult truths. The discomfort was excruciating but necessary. It was an invitation to reflect on his intentions. One afternoon, he attended a local community meeting. The air crackled with energy, the room filled with voices passionately advocating for change. As he listened, John felt a mixture of admiration and inadequacy. He was one of the few outsiders present. Wealth was no shield against the piercing truths being articulated. When it was his turn to speak, he stood with a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hi, I'm John," he began, his voice steady yet vulnerable. "I want to learn, and to help in the ways that matter." The room went silent, eyes locking on him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "What do you know about our struggles?" a woman called out, her tone pointed yet earnest. He swallowed hard, battling the urge to retreat. "I'm learning. I was blind to these struggles for so long. I've started reaching out because I believe change happens through understanding. I want to earn your trust." Laughter rippled through the crowd, not mocking, but a shared acknowledgement of the absurdity of his attempt to step into their world. "And how do you plan to do that?" someone challenged. "I don't have all the answers. I just have a commitment to listen and act without presumption." The silence that followed suffocated him. Would they see through any sincerity? The doubt haunted him as he returned home that evening. Staring at his reflection, he grappled with the remnants of his past. The ease of his life had insulated him from discomfort, illuminating just how unprepared he truly was. But he couldn't give up now. The week had opened his eyes to the complexities of true activism and the necessity of genuine relationships. Determined to turn vulnerability into strength, he formulated a plan. He would establish a series of community workshops, not dictated by him, but guided by those facing challenges. A place for them to share their voices, their truths, and perhaps forge a real connection. Yet, as he drafted his ideas, doubts curled back. The risk of failure loomed ever larger. The fear of oversimplifying their struggles gripped him with tighter fingers. How would he face those he endeavored to help? What if they were still reluctant to trust him despite his best intentions? The uncertainty weighed heavily in his chest, yet within it flickered a fragile hope. Would his effort to connect authentically usher a new chapter in both his life and theirs? John sat in the dim light of his study, the setting sun casting elongated shadows across the room, mirroring the questions that deepened within him. Could he truly navigate this uncharted emotional terrain, or would it all unravel before he had a chance to make a meaningful difference? As the days turned into a blur of preparations, John felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him with each passing moment. The idea of the workshops had ignited a fire within him, but the practicalities loomed large. They weren't merely exercises in altruism, they demanded authenticity and vulnerability from him, something he had rarely been called to do in his privileged life. He began crafting flyers, his fingers trembling slightly as he considered how to convey the essence of his intention without coming across as patronizing. He found himself staring at the blank page, grappling with the realization that every word mattered. The people he hoped to reach had suffered too long under the illusion that their voices were unworthy of being heard. And here he was, a man of means, positioning himself as the facilitator of their expressions. What audacity it seemed. Self-doubt tightened its grip as he recalled Mrs. Thompson's face the previous week, particularly the defiance that danced in her eyes when she mentioned her past struggles. He understood she wasn't looking for someone to give her a handout. She sought someone who acknowledged her dignity, her experience. This revelation struck him. Could he genuinely share that space and empower rather than impose? With every draft he made, he could feel the forms of the past pushing forward, the remnants of his sheltered upbringing whispering, "You're not one of them." Yet, with a decisive exhalation, he finally scrawled across the top, "Come share your story. You are important." Using the phrase felt liberating, but terrified him. On the day the flyers were set to be posted, John ventured out into the community, his heart racing. He stood before the bulletin board at a local grocery store, his palms clammy against the textured paper. As he pinned the flyer above tattered notices offering support for those in crisis, a sense of vulnerability washed over him. Would anyone come? Would he meet an indifference that echoed his fears of inadequacy? Later that evening, he returned home, tossing the keys onto the marble counter with a sigh as he tried to shake off the haunting voices of doubt. The reality that gripped him was one of imbalance. He was taking more than he could give. His resources were limitless, yet his understanding was shockingly minimal. How could he bridge that gap? The night wore on, and sleep eluded him, his mind swirling with both anxiety and a nagging reminder of the community meeting's energy. Those pulsating voices haunted his dreams, intertwining with aspirations that felt increasingly palpable. Would his workshops be met with hope or disdain? Motivated by an instinctive push, he decided to reach out to his contacts from the community meeting to ask them to join him while working the workshops. If he was supposed to learn from their insights, he needed to ensure they felt ownership over their narratives. The thought of asking for their input gave him pause, yet it was crucial. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he composed heartfelt messages, done with the stifling layers of past hesitations. The more he wrote, the clearer it became. This was not merely about his transformation. It was about the lives that could intertwine with his in a meaningful, respectful way. Yet, as he prepared to send the messages, another shadow emerged. What if they rejected him? What if they viewed him only as the millionaire and closed the door to any opportunities for collaboration? John sank deeper into his chair, conflicted between a fledgling sense of purpose and the sting of rejection that lurked in the back of his mind like a predator ready to pounce. His heart raced at the prospect of real connection, tethered by the tight ropes of his anticipated failures. He took a deep breath and pressed send. The vibration of his phone confirmed delivery, and an unexpected wave of relief washed over him. There was no turning back. He had bounded past the threshold and had to trust the process or risk missing an opportunity for genuine familial growth. Yet, as hope began to swell, reality shattered the tranquility. A conversation with Mrs. Thompson suddenly loomed large in his consciousness. She had confided in him once about her struggles, about how the world sometimes felt like a series of closed doors for those in need. Would he be brave enough to return to her? To share his vision and ask for her collaboration as a guiding force in the future workshops? This thought paralyzed him with both fear and an exhilarating notion of possibility. As the night wore on, he realized that he was on the precipice of something deep and profound, and he had to face it head-on. Could he face her without faltering, without letting the shadows of his privilege obscure her light? His next steps could lead him either toward a collaborative relationship that honored both their experiences or into a quagmire of guilt and misunderstanding. The journey ahead beckoned, fraught with uncertainty and lessons to be learned. All he needed to do was take that daunting step. Would he dare to confront the person who could help steer him in the right direction, or would the fear of rejection continue to hold him captive? The sun rose, casting a timid light that seeped through the heavy curtains of John's living room. He sat, once again consumed by the mix of anticipation and trepidation that had plagued him for days. The flyer on his desk, still crisp and unblemished, served as a reminder of the promise he'd made to strive for authenticity and connection. He needed to speak with Mrs. Thompson, to articulate a vision that transcended his privilege. His mind raced as he envisioned their conversation. Would he stumble over his words, each syllable echoing his insecurities? He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the core intent: to empower others to share their narratives, to encourage them to reclaim their significance. How could he expect to do that if he remained silent? He slid his phone from his pocket, fingers hovering over her number. The thought of dialing sent a vortex of anxiety surging through him. Each ring felt like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation with his own fragility. Would she dismiss him as just another wealthy man looking to absolve his guilt? The possibility churned in his stomach. He had to confront this fear head on. As the connect tone echoed, a familiar voice greeted him. "Hello, John. It's been a while." Her tone was warm yet tinged with caution. Mrs. Thompson," he began, instantly regretting the slight stammer. "I'd like to talk to you about an idea I have." For a moment, silence lingered between them, heavy and taut. Then she spoke, her voice even. "You have something to say?" "Yes." He leaned in, drawing strength from the conviction that had ignited him. "I want to start workshops. I want to create a space where people can share their stories, their experiences. I believe it's important for them to be heard, and I would love your guidance on how to do that." A pause enveloped the line. "What makes you think you can lead such workshops, John?" she challenged, her tone questioning yet not unfriendly. The query filled him with intensity. "Because I believe in the power of storytelling. I've seen how much it matters to share our experiences, to understand each other's realities. I want to learn from the truth of those who face challenges I can only begin to comprehend." "I see." Her voice softened, but a trace of skepticism remained. "You must understand, John, that this is not just about creating a platform. This is about respecting the people you wish to engage with. Trust is earned, not given." He swallowed hard, her words resonating with a painful honesty that he needed to confront. "I know I can't demand trust, and I don't want to impose. That's why I'm calling you. I'd like you to be a part of this, to help shape how we approach these sessions." Another pause stretched across the line, heavy with contemplation. He could almost hear her weighing his intentions. "I'll consider it, John, but you need to understand that this venture requires you to step out of your comfort zone deeply. Are you prepared for that?" "More than ever," he asserted with a clarity he hadn't felt before. "I want to understand what they've gone through. I want to illuminate their voices, not overshadow them." There was an undeniable shift in her tone as she replied, "Then take a moment to reflect on your motivations and come back to me with a solid plan. I don't doubt your intentions, but intention without understanding can lead to harm." Her final words echoed ominously, leaving no room for complacency. John thanked her and ended the call, his heart racing. He had taken a critical step, yet the path ahead proved treacherous. How could he develop a plan that respected the dignity of those he wished to help while ensuring he didn't slip back into familiar patterns of comfort and privilege? As he sat back in his chair, the weight of responsibility settled heavily over him. He had no choice but to immerse himself fully in this journey, to push past the barriers of his upbringing and embrace the voices that had long been silenced. What he didn't realize was that the connections he would cultivate would also crack open deeper fissures within himself. Determined to establish a foundation for these workshops, he began drafting potential topics to explore, seeking input from both Mrs. Thompson and others in the community. Each idea felt increasingly vulnerable, exposing parts of himself previously tucked away. Would he be able to confront his own hesitations while nurturing others, or would the revelations that awaited him prove too disorienting? The mists of self-discovery were thickening, swirling around him as he pondered his path ahead. Just when clarity seemed within reach, he received an unexpected alert on his phone, a message from one of the community members he had contacted earlier. The words on the screen sent a shiver through him as he opened it, fully aware that what lay in store could potentially alter the trajectory of his journey. "Are you ready for what you might find?" John stood at the intersection of his past and future, clutching his phone as he read the message that held the weight of possibility. The words sparked an avalanche of emotions within him. Anticipation mixed with trepidation as he acknowledged that he was inches away from a transformation he had long yearned for, but never quite had the courage to pursue. The following weeks became a whirlwind of activity. With Mrs. Thompson's cautious encouragement, John attended community meetings, became involved in discussions that felt raw and unfiltered, and began to form connections with locals who, like him, were navigating the complexities of their realities. He embraced the discomfort of his privilege as he found resilience among the vulnerable. The stories shared were both humbling and inspiring, living testaments to the strength of the human spirit. He structured his workshops around these narratives, framing them as platforms for sharing and mutual growth, not as charity initiatives, but as collaborative endeavors. Slowly but surely, participants began to fill seats in the community center, each person bringing forward their truths, needs, and aspirations. It was not just an exchange of words, it became a profound journey of healing and hope. He listened as tales of struggle unfolded before him, stories filled with hardship, triumph, laughter, and tears that resonated deep within his core. One fateful day, after a particularly powerful session, an older gentleman approached John, his demeanor brusque, his face weathered yet earnest. "You had the courage to step into our worlds, son. Keep going," he advised, patting John's shoulder with a confidence that clarified more than others' accolades ever had. "You're doing good work." The acknowledgement felt like a key unlocking a door within him. He was no longer merely an observer. He was becoming part of something larger than himself. The realization nourished his spirit, reinforcing his commitment each day. He was no longer the vacuous millionaire drowning in the superficial riches of status. He had connected to something real, something deeply fulfilling. Meanwhile, his relationship with Mrs. Thompson flourished, evolving from regret-fueled guilt to mutual respect and admiration. Their late-night coffee chats turned into brainstorming sessions, melding her lived experiences with his business acumen. Together, they crafted initiatives that addressed immediate needs while laying the groundwork for more sustainable solutions. Every conversation brought John's understanding into sharper focus, illuminating a truth he had long ignored, that he was not the hero of this story, but rather an ally in the shared pursuit of dignity. In one critical meeting, John laid out a plan that was ambitious yet feasible, an initiative for providing vocational training tailored to the community's needs, emphasizing collaboration and empowerment. The supportive murmurs from the assembly filled him with a palpable energy as the crowd found itself united under a collective vision fostered by his unassuming courage. The culmination of their work manifested one night during a town hall meeting where he stood before the community to present the outline of the training project. The evening air was thick with expectation, every face illuminated by the soft glow of overhead lights. He felt the impact of a year of conflict and transformation surging through his veins as he delivered his speech, his heart thumping like a drumbeat of purpose. "We can't turn back, and we won't. We're here for each other, to lift each other up. Together we'll build something lasting, he proclaimed, looking from face to face, locking onto the anticipation sparkling in their eyes. At that moment, confidence radiated from him, no longer the conflicted millionaire, but an engaged participant in a cause that resonated within the very fabric of the community. The applause that followed was not simply affirmation of a plan, it was the recognition of a bridge that had been built from the rubble of his past choices. As John departed that evening, he took a moment to breathe in the cool air. The satisfaction of his work echoed in his heart, a resonating pulse of fulfillment coursing through him. He'd spent years yearning for professional acclaim, but nothing felt more rewarding than this connection woven with genuine purpose. He turned, spotting Mrs. Thompson in the crowd, her smile a reflection of both pride and affection. Recognition washed over him. This was the life he intended to lead. Throughout his journey, he had achieved more than he once thought possible. A life grounded in humility, service, and the unwavering strength of community spirit. Now standing amid the fragments of both worlds, he felt whole, a self-made millionaire transformed into a dedicated advocate and collaborator. He had uncovered the real definitions of success, aligned perfectly with personal achievement, nurtured by profound connections. This was what he had sought, an enriching life, filled with not just wealth, but worth, discovered through the untold stories of others. He had conquered his fears, demonstrated the capacity for change, and proved that transformation begins with listening, understanding, and taking action. As he walked forward, the night carried a gentle breeze, whispering the echoes of the lives intertwined with his, encouraging him along this new pathway paved with both hardship and hope. This chapter had closed with clarity, but the story was just beginning, echoing promises of what could be built together through compassion and understanding. Now is the time for you to step forward. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and support this work. Comment your reactions and theories about John's transformation and share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share. The change starts with you.